In the string-heavy track, Deltarune's Scarlet Forest theme promotes a call to action. There is indeed major emphasis put on exploration in this area. I feel this is successfully conveyed through both the incessant snare hits and the syncopated plucked strings. Furthermore, a certain mystery can be found in the forest as well. For example, multiple hidden locations are spread throughout the forest, one of which may hint at a dark revelation. This too is represented in the song through the oboe's gloomy descending melody. You won't find many major chord changes that linger too long. The jaunty nature of the song reminds me of what might be played at a carnival, especially when the song takes a turn in the latter half. Themes of a carnival can be found throughout the game, such as the monsters locked in colorful cages, Seam's theme, and the strange enemies that dance around. Overall, the composer for this track, Toby Fox, did a terrific job in selling the player a sense of dread, while also maintaining a forward momentum. Composed by the multi-talented Toby Fox, the song Scarlet Forest turns out to be one of the most memorable pieces in his newest game, Deltarune. Although Toby uses more traditional orchestral instruments, he utilizes them in a non-traditional way that's more akin to video game type music. The soundtrack itself is extremely varied, as was his previous game, Undertale. Fox's lack of music training can fool most listeners, but his style of composing certainly doesn't rely on conventional techniques. This is apparent in the song structure, where we have a long section 1, divided into multiple subsections, and two quicker sections 2 and 3, followed by a quicker ending. Now this ending here, or the transition, is also unconventional, as it solos the piano and strings, which is not seen in the entire song. The loop point is also a bit jarring, as the original song cuts out as soon as this transition part finishes. The time signature is common 4/4, and the tempo is at 120, which incidentally is the standard tempo that most stars are set to. This could point to that Toby wrote the song in the DAW first, and liked the tempo so much that he didn't change it. Scarlet Forest introduces instruments at two main points. Sections 1B, where the strings ensemble is introduced, along with the high strings at the end, and sections 1C, where the percussion is introduced, and the melody instrument, the piccolo. This is important in music as it prevents listening fatigue of hearing the same instruments. Also, while the rhythm of the piece is generally the same throughout, sections 2 and 3 introduce new patterns for the double bass and the melody instruments. There is a clear build-up as we move through these sections, climaxing in section 3 where even cymbals are added for extra emphasis. The double bass plays an important role in Scarlet Forest. Of course, in the intro it functions as the rhythm along with the pizzicato, accenting these downbeats. The double bass is the main low end of the instruments, in fact, practically the only low frequency instrument besides the timpani, which is added later. While it is used throughout the song, other instruments soon drown it out toward the end. The sound itself is much beefier than regular. I combined two double bass instruments, each giving a different reverb sound. A bass clarinet is also added to give definition to the sound, and is well hidden in the original song. The pattern that pervades through this song is this 3-note pattern. With F sharp as the root note, the pattern uses the common descending and ascending arrangement before repeating again. However, the repeat has a variance to it. So as you can hear in the previous part, the home note follows from F sharp to C sharp, then B, then to E up here, and then back to this F sharp. However, in the variants, it follows from F sharp down to E, to D sharp, and D, then back to F. So it goes chromatically downward and then jumps up. These two patterns are repeated throughout this entire first section without change. Section 2 modulates between B and the F sharp. The 3-note pattern continues though, and the variance for the section 2 is just slightly different at this end note. Section 3 also remains much the same, but changes the pattern a little bit. It appears to start the same, but around the middle point, it removes a few notes to accent the cymbal crashes. It is also modulated to D. The cello pizzicato is clearly the contrasting, syncopated pattern to the double bass. Its only role is to provide this opposing pattern and to give more support to the chord progression. The chords feature a triad chord from here, F sharp, and then an octave leap to this higher F. It also should be noted that the chords follow the same progression as the double bass, and the pattern literally stays constant until the next section. Here in section 2 we have 1/2 of the pattern repeating. And then the next part alternates between this E and this D sharp. Section 3 pattern is a little different. It's by far the most chord shifting sequence in the entire song, but however you can see that the chord shape itself remains the same as before. There are 2 types of strings in the song, the strings ensemble and the high strings. The ensemble is mainly the lead while the high strings support them, although the high strings sometimes soar above the other instruments at certain points. The ensemble strings first introduce the melody to the piece. Now, as you can see, this melody is quite lengthy, but Toby Fox does a great job of making it unforgettable. The methods he uses to do this are firstly the repetition of this phrase, this entire pattern. Uses it throughout the entire section 1B and section 1C. Another form of repetition is in the melody itself. You can hear in this up and down pattern how some motifs are repeated, like this, and these two, and then this quick trill is repeated again here. Of course, this kind of reiteration would get stale, so Fox uses several quarter notes at the end here to alter the pace. The final notes of C sharp are also the climax of the motif, as they end on the 5th interval of the root note G. The cadence from this C sharp to this G sharp resolves nicely. In section 1B, more layers are added to give the strings warmth. It mostly uses intervals of fourths to give this majestic feeling. Section 2 abruptly cuts out the strings at the end here. Both the oboe and strings support each other in this section. So once the oboe exits in this final note, the strings kind of continue the melody until they both join together in this section. This leads us to a repeat of the section. Now, section 3 is by far the most simplest of the 3 sections. It just descends in this downward motion. Now, of course, this complements the high strings, which are playing most bombastically. The high strings sound much the same as the strings ensemble, so they can be a little hard to pick out. They enter near the end of section 1B here to prepare us for the upcoming percussion. The motif here really showcases one of my favorite techniques to use as a composer. Chromatically rising or descending down or up the key can create a fantastic countermelody to any lead instrument. Now in section 1C, the strings and the piccolo double each other here and create an interesting effect. As you can see, the high strings are played more legatally and the piccolo uses staccato notes. The melody does a great job of varying between eighth note, quarter notes, and half notes to keep the rhythm fresh. Of course, this pattern is repeated again in the next section. Now here in section 2, the high strings only accent the final 2 notes of the pattern. And section 3 is by far the most bombastic, as I said, of the 3 sections, highlighting the soaring melody in an almost Christmas-like staccato section. The first part revisits the previous oboe melody, bringing it to the forefront of the song. As you see, this little quick motif here is represented in the oboe when it gets its own section. A neat little touch is that in the second set of strings, the lower of them descend downward while the higher strings soar above the melody. While this next staccato section might seem a little out of place, it does fit the climatic theme of the end of the song. And finally, the last few quarter notes provide a slight mournful theme that accompanies the piano. Soft and subtle, yet also driving, the percussion only utilizes 4 instruments: the snare, the timpani, the tambourine, and the cymbal crashes. The snare fits well with the pizzicato and gives the pizzicato the high end it needs in the mix. And it begins with the snare roll. Obviously, the tambourine strikes on the downbeat support the double bass as well. Now underneath, the timpani copies the double bass pattern exactly. You can see here. Except for the snare roll at the beginning and the cymbal crashes at the end, that's all there is to the percussion. The piccolo is given its own subsection in 1C. As mentioned before, it uses staccato notes to double with the high strings. However, Toby Fox adds a few details that are worth taking a look at. In this first introduction, it uses the fourth interval we've seen before in the strings, giving them a majestic quality to them. And the next section utilizes a cool riff you'll just have to hear yourself. The top notes keep reaching higher and higher, and the bottom notes are doubled. Like the piccolo, the oboe has its own section to shine. Unlike the piccolo, however, it is uninterrupted by the strings until it reaches its last note. Then it sort of joins in with the strings in the next part. And then the next section is just a basic repeat with a few added notes here, some harmony. It includes that fourth interval we've talked about. Since the piano and the bell are often played together, I paired them so it'll be easier to see. The bell is much needed as the song so far sounds quite dark. During section 2, the two mirror each other the exact same notes of the oboe melody. You can see the oboe melody is pretty much the same. In section 3, we have the piano and the bell split apart, with the piano taking the lower end of the spectrum and the bell accenting the cymbal crashes. Again, the piano uses fourths to harmonize with itself, a common theme we have seen thus far. The melody here also harmonizes with the strings note for note. Now, the ending here appears out of almost nowhere, but it offers a unique finish to Scarlet Forest. The waltz-like pattern with this quick staccato lower hand note really stands out when compared with the slower strings. Extremely minimal effects were used on the instruments themselves. I added some extra compression to beef up the double basses, and perhaps the most interesting aspect of the effects in general was the lack of high end in the song. I first assumed that this was due to an absence of high-frequency instruments, but after tweaking the EQ of the song, I believe Toby intentionally took off some of the high end to make the song sound a little less clear. While a large majority of the instruments are pan-center, there are certainly some panning elements going on. Since many orchestral instruments were used, Toby, for the most part, took into account the traditional panning of an orchestra. Now you can see in this intro the double basses are panned right, along with the cello. The strings are panned both left and upper left when you get to them. Timpani is panned right. Piccolo upper left. The clarinet upper left. Let's see, where is it? The synth harp combo on the right. Finally, the only orchestral instrument that is not panned in its usual spot is the high strings, which I used a contrasting right pan to contrast the string ensemble. In volume, the double bass and the pizzicato are definitely much louder than usual, so much so that I had to compress them and turn them up inside their own plugin. Generally, the melody instruments like the piccolo, oboe, and piano at the end but on the same level as the double bass. Percussion is unusually light, especially the snare, tambourine, and the cymbal crashes. Overall, you have quite an even mix. Now, as I play the song in full, pay attention to the elements we've discussed before. How the high strings enter along with the string ensemble near the end of section 1b. How the percussion is unusually light in terms of volume. How the piccolo doubles with the high strings at this point. And in section 2, how the oboe, this little motif here, is doubled in the piano bell. And then in section 3, how the high strings soar above the rest of the instruments. Fans of Undertale were not expecting Deltarune to arrive so quickly, but the game and especially the soundtrack delivered in spades. Scarlet Forest very much deserves its recent popularity due to its unusual song structure and stimulating melody writing. Orchestral instruments used in the hands of a video game composer can always create exciting results. Toby Fox only uses the number of instruments he needs to get his point across. The small use of effects goes to show that one does not need to add effect upon effect to create stimulating songs. Through use of applying clever harmony, Toby can get away through only using several instruments. I very much love breaking down a more recent soundtrack, and I hope you followed along and enjoyed watching as well. You can watch my other video game analyses, which feature games such as Perfect Dark, Sonic 2, and more. See you soon, and have a great rest of your day.